interested into like in sports, like whether it be like a specific event, player, or like person who's close to you?
My dad. So, my dad was always a big sports fan, and he had, growing up in South Florida, he had season tickets to Miami Dolphin games. He had season tickets to the Miami Hurricanes in the Orange Bowl all the way through 1995 when we moved here. He was an IBMer, so we got shipped up here in 1995. So it just kind of was part of my childhood, and that's how you get into it. Now,
Yeah,
sometimes you're not into it. With my own kids, I take them to sporting events, and they don't seem all that
yeah,
interested in it. But I was, and he'd listen to sports talk down in Miami, and I would listen along with him, and I was interested in the reactions and what they had to say. So that's probably where it started. That's so that my the thing that hooked me would probably be going to Miami Hurricanes college football games. So like seeing wide right with Florida State or
yeah,
seeing Catholics versus convicts with Notre Dame. I got to see all those things
yeah,
in person, and that's what hooked me. And, I saw playoff games too in the NFL with the Dolphins and the Bills and that sort of stuff. And then when the Miami Heat became a thing, I got to see my first
yeah,
NBA games. I got to see Michael Jordan and Shaq when they first came in the league. That kind of stuff.
yeah.
So my dad was very active in taking me to these sporting events because he was always a sports fan, and it just kind of stuck.
That's awesome. Um, so like what sports would you say you cover in a given day? Just like uh one specifically or
Well, I mean, given the area, it's mainly college football and college basketball,
right?
and the way we work in seasons just like there are seasons for the sports. So I'll start it with not a calendar year, but the sports calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Once we come out of the summer, it's football, football, football.
Right.
By the time we get to mid July, late July, the ACC does their kickoff event. That's when we start getting into previewing college football. And obviously, we'll focus on State, Carolina, and Duke and the rest of
Yeah.
the ACC and national college football stuff. And then you got the NFL. And because since we live in a very transplant heavy area,
Mm-hmm.
you can really talk about anything you want NFL wise. You
Yeah.
don't have to talk about the Panthers all the time. Although, the
Right.
Panthers clearly moved the needle, but we can talk about just any major football thing because we have so many transplants due to the RTP and best place to live, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then it comes to Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill. So the football season eventually gives way to the busiest month that we have, which is usually October, because we have college football and NFL, college basketball starts
Right.
off, and then you got the hockey as well.
Yeah.
So you're covering the Carolina Hurricanes. And that stays busy through Christmas. Once the Super Bowl's over, we're mainly focused on ACC basketball through the ACC tournament and the Final Four. And then once April hits, hopefully the Canes are in the playoffs. That hasn't been the
Yeah.
case since 2009, obviously. But once we get to April, things just kind of open up to whatever the news of the day is. You got the
Right.
you got the NFL draft, you got the Masters.
Mm-hmm.
You start transitioning over to the NBA. Everybody's still obsessed with LeBron James or their
Yeah.
hot takes on the Golden State Warriors or whatever it is. So that'll sustain us through May and a little bit of June. But then once we hit the summertime, it's like, all right, we're just
Can't
just
take a break.
well, it's not you can't take a break. You just hope that there's enough things going on
Yeah.
to talk about. So you just have to kind of monitor the. So there's a flow to it that
Mhm.
starts in late July, early August, and runs us through about May, and that's usually our busiest times of the year.
Okay. So I feel like you already answered this, but do you have any preferences when it comes to covering certain sports?
I prefer, well, I mean, because of the area, I prefer the college stuff. I
Yeah.
like college. I've always liked college football.
Mhm.
Obviously, going to Hurricane games as a kid. So college football has always been my thing. Since I
Mhm.
didn't grow up here, I had to like learn to appreciate college basketball.
Yeah.
But I started to gain that appreciation when I was at NC State.
Mhm.
And when I was at NC State between '97 and '01, that's when they transitioned from Reynolds Coliseum over to PNC Arena,
Yeah.
or at the time was the Raleigh Entertainment and Sports Arena. That's how old I am. So that's when I started to gain an appreciation for college basketball. My wife, we dated through college. She went to Carolina. She's a hardcore Tar Heel fan, and I got to kind of get that, get that dynamic.
Yeah. House
Um,
divided.
right, that whole thing. I mean, I remember I went to the Smith Center one time actually it was on a Valentine's Day when they played NC State. And I'm in my NC State stuff, and she's in her Carolina stuff. I mean, like that. It's
Yeah.
that kind of stuff started to click for me in college. So the college athletics would be the thing that I probably love covering the most.
Yeah, I understand that. A lot more competition I feel in college than
Well,
than
we're in a,
professional.
and plus on top of that, we're in a unique area where we treat the local schools like pro teams. We
Yeah.
treat State, Carolina, Duke like mainly State and Carolina like pro teams, and Duke obviously factors in. And because of the three schools and the dynamic between all three of them, it creates a lot of cool storylines that other places in the country just don't have.
Yeah.
So, like last week's a prime example of this. We had the Carolina Duke game on Thursday, followed up by the State Carolina game on Saturday.
Mm.
And that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to Saturday dynamic made for some really fun,
Yeah.
petty stuff, but it was fun.
So what does a standard day of work consist of for you? Like,
A lot of reading.
a lot of reading.
Yeah, a
some
lot of reading.
research and
Yeah,
stuff?
so the day typically is, I wake up before the kids and I just kind of go through my RSS feed. I use Feedly, and I basically have an RSS feed for the major newspapers.
Mhm.
So like the NNO, Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, that kind of
Right.
stuff. And then I'll save stories. Like I don't have enough time to get into them. I just go,
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. I'll save
Mhm.
them. Get the kids off to school, whatever, and then I'll sit down around 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then actually go through those stories, make any particular notes that I need to. And then the rest of the day is just kind of monitoring things,
Yeah.
see if anything new happens, being on social media, see if anything interesting happens. And then, I'll get to the studio anytime after lunch, because the show doesn't start till 3. I can do a lot of this stuff at home.
Mhm.
But if we need to record interviews because the people are only available at a particular time, not live during the show, we'll do that. And then the show starts at 3, and, Adam and I will, we got a usual text thread where we kind of have an idea of what we're going to talk about. But Adam and I have been working together so long that we kind of already know what the deal is,
Mhm.
If I was working with some, when we have fill-in host, I'm a little bit more like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to talk about. Anything that you want to talk about. You work with somebody for 15 years. It's at that point, you're like, nah, I know what we're going to talk about today. It's just a matter of monitoring those things. So I'm doing a lot more reading than I ever thought I would be doing when I graduated from NC State. So I didn't think I'd be doing this much reading. So,
Well, I mean.
and a lot, and then, and in the evening, the show, whereas most people, their day will end when they clock out, our job does not. Because most of what we're going to be talking about or have been talking about will happen at 7 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. Today's a prime example of that, where State's got an important game against Syracuse.
Yeah.
That's at 9 o'clock. So I can't just, I'm going to call it a night, whatever. I'm like, no, I got to watch that game because we're going to be talking, it's an important game for the Wolfpack, and the fans are going to want to hear our opinions about it. So we got to watch it, or DVR it if it's too late, if there's too many things going on.
Right. So, what would you say, like, yours and Adam's dynamic is? Like, I see Stephen A. and Max Kellerman are always yelling at each other. Like, would you say you have, like...
I mean, Adam, the way Adam drives the show, and, usually with the radio dynamics, it used to be just a single host would drive topics. They would have a producer. They would try to get as many phone calls as possible.
Right.
But the dynamic of radio and a lot of these other shows has changed, where the audience actually just wants to hear a conversation and be a part of the conversation, and find ways to get into it, whether through social media, email, whatever it is.
Right.
I mean, we never take any phone calls because what we've figured out is that when people tune in, what they want to hear is us talking about whatever. So the dynamic is, Adam, think of it as play-by-play and color analyst. That'd be the other way to describe it.
Yeah.
Adam would be the play-by-play,
Mhm.
and I would be the color commentary. Adam's getting us in and out of breaks, setting up the topics, whatever. I'm chiming in with my opinion, and then the back and forth conversation begins. So that's how the dynamic would work. And most shows work that way now, where one person is, I'll use Chris Kroger and his show on WFNZ in Charlotte, where he's the main guy.
Yeah.
And his dynamic is he doesn't have a permanent co-host.
Right.
He has shifting co-hosts. So like one day it'll be Darren Gant from ProFootballTalk.com. Sometimes it'll be Jeff Schwartz. Like he's got a rotating cast of people that come in to hang out with him, but the dynamic is the same. Chris sets things up, and then they go back and forth. They have conversations.